This is my social issues presentation entitled Everyday Counts, Chronic Absenteeism in Schools. So, chronic absenteeism is defined as missing 15 or more school days in an academic year by the U.S. Department of Education. So, that is about 1 in 7 students in America on any given day, which equates to 98 million lost school days. So, it's broadly defined as the sum of excused and unexcused absences together. And this is different than truancy, which is usually is measured by unexcused absences. So the most common definition is that it's about 10% of the school year. So compare to peers with stronger attendance, students who are chronically absent receive less instruction, which obviously leads to negative effects on their math and their reading proficiency. They're less likely to graduate and they're more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system. Chronic absenteeism is a better predictor for dropping out of high school than suspensions and test scores. Students who are chronically absent in early grades are less likely to read at late grade level by third grade, and they're more likely to be held back. Absenteeism in kindergarten has shown to have negative effects, not just on academics, but also on development of students' socio emotional skills. But what's most interesting about this is that the effects can be reversed. So that's why it's important to study it because, yes, all of those things seem tremendously overwhelming, but they can be fixed. So the following slides are going to contain some graphs provided by the Department of Education about chronic absenteeism in the state of Ohio. And so the first one shows the district typology, which is a way of grouping like districts, typically for research purposes, but you can get a sense of the type of school and what their chronic absenteeism looks like. So, for example, urban, very high poverty schools have the highest absentee rate, which is 26.7%. And then you can contrast that to suburban, very low poverty schools, which obviously have significantly lower chronic absenteeism rate, which is 6.7%. So the next slide shows you absenteeism by subgroup, and it's a variety of subgroups, not just race, but you can see in terms of race, African American and American Indian Alaskan Natives have the highest absentee rate in Ohio by race. But if you also look, we have students with disabilities. They have a chronic absenteeism rate of 25%. Economically disadvantaged is similar at 24.5%. And then you can contrast that with all students over here on the right. The average in the state of Ohio for everyone is 16.4%. And then the last slide gives you an idea of what it looks like by grade. So we look at kindergarten, and that is about what the state average is across the board for everyone, 16.5%-ish. And then we can look at, as elementary continues, it kind of levels off a little bit, and third, fourth, fifth, starts to get worse as we transition to middle school, and then really starts to get worse as we transition to high school, peaking in 12th grade at 29.5%. And again, this is just in Ohio. So the question is, why are students absent? And so there are various frameworks that can kind of group these in different ways. And I'm using this one that kind of groups them into barriers, negative school experiences, lack of engagement, and misconceptions. So the first one is barriers, which are factors that are out of the control of students or families. So you can see the list here that range anywhere from illnesses to transportation issues to stressful family transitions like divorce, the sibling effect, which is when a child is more likely to be absent if a sibling is also absent. We have sibling and elder care, there's mental health issues. So those are beyond the control of students and their families. The next one is negative school experiences, and these are typically viewed from the student perspective. So they could be experiencing bullying. They could just be struggling socially or academically. They could have other larger school related issues like systemic levels of grade retention, school based racism and discrimination. Students might be avoiding just being punished for turning things in late, or they might be avoiding perceived embarrassment or even real embarrassment by not coming to school. So another big grouping of reasons students are absent is lack of engagement. So this is really more related to the classroom itself. So looking at teacher behavior, teacher absences, their instruction, is it culturally relevant? Do they have a welcoming environment? Does the school itself have a positive climate? Are adults developing meaningful relationships with students? So you can see that the lack of engagement is really, as I mentioned, related to the classroom itself. And then the last one is related to parental misconceptions. So some parents believe that missing instruction in the early grades isn't really that big a deal, and it's um, could lead to unnecessary absences. They may equate grades like kindergarten to more like daycare, and students can drop in and out. And so it's not that they don't think that education is important, but they may underestimate what is actually happening in the classroom at that level and the importance of being there every day. And then another one is that they don't necessarily have a good sense of how often their student is actually absent, and they can underestimate the total. So that leads us to a couple different policies and some research that has been done in this area. A huge policy is the Every Student Succeeds Act, and related to um, chronic absenteeism, it now requires that state report that chronic absence data. And the states also can choose to use that data as their fifth indicator. So they're required to use a non-academic success indicator. And the District of Columbia and 36 states have chosen to use chronic absenteeism as part of their fifth indicator for accountability factors. So another big piece here, specifically in Ohio, is House Bill 410, which was passed in December 2016, and it went into effect in the 2017-2018 school year. And it has multiple layers to it. One of them is the overall idea here is that it would help make preventative measures important to address chronic absenteeism. So, and I'll show kind of the cutoffs on the next slide, but when students reach certain levels, intervention plans would be developed so that you could help them get to school. And another huge piece of this is that school districts are no longer allowed to expel or suspend a student for being truant. So if I skip school, my punishment for skipping school can't be being not allowed to come to school, because that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So here is their specific definitions and cutoffs. And you can see that it's measured in hours, not in days. So that was another interesting change. So chronic absenteeism, I'm starting in the bottom, is 10% with or without legitimate excuses. Excessive absences are 65, and these are hours, with or without legitimate excuse, but we still have the idea of habitual truancy, and that's related to unexcused absences. So there is some promising research in this area. One thing that we did learn is that the court system is not effective. So punching students through the juvenile court system does not fix chronic absenteeism. But there are a couple things that do, and most of them are related to just awareness. So one of them is mailings that were sent out. They were postcards, and they really just made parents aware of how often their child had been absent. And an interesting thing is that the control group for this experiment underreported their students' attendance by more than 6 days. So really, this is an awareness piece that when parents are more aware, that the study concluded that they're making sure their students are going to school more often. So reactive phone calls, there was a review of the literature by McConnell and Kubina in 2014, and they found that phone calls, whether it's by administrator, administrative assistant, teachers, recorded messages, those have a positive impact on increasing attendance. And then there was another interesting study that was done about these proactive text messages, and it set up a communication method between families and the school. And they had one point person who worked with the families, and that they, in real time, could talk about some barriers to attendance, and then the school could help them address those issues. So, for example, if there were transportation issues that day, the school could help and maybe figure out a way to get the student to class and address those transportation issues. So how do I feel about all this? So chronic absenteeism is a huge, huge issue in my classroom, and it is the number one reason that students fail my class. So if you fail, it's most likely because you're absent. Obviously, first period is the biggest issue that I have. But there are still issues throughout the rest of the day. So this leads to lost instruction time, the opportunity cost that when a student does come back, I somehow have to catch them up and work with them in the classroom while the other students are moving on. I could be using that time more effectively if the student was there regularly. It's incredible disruption. They come to class, they don't know what to do. I miss the stuff. Can you just give me the paper? But I cannot really replace that 46 minutes of instruction and feedback and practice and modeling. I can't do that in 2 minutes. So it's incredibly disruptive. And the biggest issue for me that I see is the cycle of disengagement. So once I'm absent, maybe once or twice, and I come back, I don't know what's going on in the class. So I feel uncomfortable. Um, and it doesn't feel good. I don't want to be there. So then the next time, oh, I'm about to go to class. You know what? It didn't feel good last time I was there. I don't want to go. So it becomes this I didn't feel good there, so I'm going to miss class. And then when I miss class, it leads to me not feeling good when I do eventually go back to class. So that's a huge problem. Teachers can have an impact up to a certain point, but as you saw that huge list of reasons that students are chronically absent, the teacher can only control that to a certain extent. They can help with the awareness piece, but some of the systemic issues, some of the barriers that families are facing, the teachers can really only do so much. And I do believe that some school policies make it worse in terms of what they're punishing students for. For example, in my district, if you're late to first period, you get a punishment after the fourth time. But if you're unexcused, unless someone goes and checks that, you don't get a punishment. So if I'm running late to first period, I might as well just not go because then I'm less likely to get a punishment. So school districts must invest the time to unearth the specific causes of students' absences, which should inform their intervention plans. So this has to be on a student-to-student basis. Otherwise, broad policy, changes aren't really going to do anything. Attendance awards aren't necessarily going to do anything when a student is absent because they lack, health care. That's not helpful. So it really is a student by student basis. So conclusion. So I think that it's great that this spotlight is now on chronic absenteeism, which is including excused and unexcused absences, because it does have a tremendous impact on academic measures in terms of student learning and in terms of their graduation. But I think the most promising thing is that it can be reversed, that if we can get kids to start coming back to class, that we can fix some of these lags or these pockets of missing information and get them caught up, especially in the earlier years. So, what are possible next steps? Are these policy changes having a positive impact? Does it matter that states chose chronic absenteeism as a fifth indicator? Is House Bill 410 effective? Are those intervention teams doing what they are supposed to be doing? From my perspective, on one hand, they are helpful, but on the other hand, it puts a tremendous burden on the teachers and the administrators and our social workers to track all of the information and make multiple contacts. So is that worth it? I don't know. These are questions that I have. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and my references are at the end. I will include a link to the presentation so that if you want to explore any of these resources, I have linked the websites. Thank you very much.